The vanishing of Emily Grace. The golden wheat fields of rural Iowa stretched endlessly under the warm summer sun, their gentle swaying whispering secrets to the wind. It was a land of simple lives and deep roots, where families passed down traditions alongside acres of farmland. Life here was predictable, steady, until the day Emily Grace vanished without a trace. Sarah Whitmore wiped the sweat from her brow as she stepped onto the porch of her farmhouse, squinting against the sunlight. It was early August, and the days were long and sweltering. Her 2-year-old daughter, Emily, played a few yards away near the edge of the cornfield, her tiny fingers digging into the rich soil. The little girl had always been drawn to the outdoors, finding wonder in the simplest things: a ladybug on a leaf, a butterfly floating past. Sarah had only turned away for a moment, just long enough to grab a cold glass of lemonade from the kitchen. When she returned, Emily was gone. At first, panic hadn't set in. She called Emily's name, expecting her to peek out from between the tall stalks of corn with a giggle. But silence answered her instead. Heart pounding, Sarah rushed toward the cornfield, her feet crunching against the dry soil. She pushed aside the stalks, her voice growing more desperate with each call. "Emily, sweetheart, where are you?" No answer. The fear that had been a whisper in her mind roared to life, spreading ice through her veins. Something was wrong. By the time Sarah called her husband, Daniel, home from the fields, the sun was dipping toward the horizon. He arrived breathless, his face pale beneath his farmer's tan. Without hesitation, they called the police. The search began immediately. Neighbors, friends, and the entire community rallied to help. They combed through the cornfields, checked nearby barns, and even searched the dried-up creek bed that ran along the property. Officers used bloodhounds, their noses pressed to the ground, sniffing for any trace of the little girl. Nothing. Not a single footprint, no sign of struggle. It was as if Emily had simply evaporated into thin air. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The Whitmores' once happy home grew silent. The laughter of their daughter was replaced with an aching emptiness that could not be filled. Sarah stopped cooking, barely ate, barely spoke. Daniel buried himself in farm work, avoiding the house as much as possible. Years passed. Leads came and went, but none ever led to Emily. Some speculated that a stranger had taken her, driving away on the long, empty roads that stretched for miles. Others whispered about something darker, that perhaps Emily had wandered into the cornfield, only to meet a fate too terrible to imagine. But the worst part, the unanswered questions. Sarah never stopped searching. Every abandoned barn, every lone dirt road, every shadow in the night carried the same silent, desperate hope. Could Emily still be out there? Then, one evening, nearly a decade later, Sarah stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. It was a stormy night. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the old farmhouse windows. Sarah had ventured out to check on the livestock in the barn, her lantern swinging as she fought against the howling wind. Rain pelted her face, and the mud clung to her boots as she made her way across the yard. Just as she reached the entrance to the barn, a flicker of movement caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a stray animal, a flash of pale skin and tangled hair near the edge of the pig pens. But when she stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. A small figure huddled in the shadows, barely visible against the darkened wooden walls. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. A girl. She was filthy, her thin arms covered in scratches, her clothes ragged and too small. But what stopped Sarah cold were the eyes, wide, terrified, and unmistakable. Emily. Tears blurred Sarah's vision. Her hand shook as she reached forward, her voice breaking. "Emily, is it really you?" The girl flinched, pressing herself against the wall as if trying to disappear. Sarah's breath hitched. 10 years of grief, of longing, of guilt came crashing down in that single moment. But even through the overwhelming wave of emotion, one terrifying thought clawed its way into her mind. If Emily had been here all this time, Then someone had been keeping her, and they might be watching. The girl in the barn. Sarah Whitmore's entire body trembled as she stood frozen in the dimly lit barn. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing through the gaps in the wooden walls, momentarily illuminating the small, frail figure cowering in the corner. It was impossible. It was her. Her baby girl. The daughter she had lost 10 years ago. Emily Grace. Sarah's breath hitched as she took a shaky step forward, her boots squelching in the damp straw covering the barn floor. "Emily," she whispered, voice barely audible over the roar of the wind outside. The girl didn't move. She stood pressed against the wooden wall, her small hands balled into fists at her sides. Her tangled, filthy hair cascaded down her shoulders in unkempt waves, and her skin, pale beneath the layers of grime, was marred with bruises. Deep, dark bruises. Sarah felt something hot and violent coil in her chest. Who had done this to her? Who had taken her child and left her to suffer? She took another step forward, her hands reaching out instinctively, desperate to touch her daughter, to pull her into her arms and never let go. But the girl flinched. She didn't run to Sarah. She didn't cry out for her mother. Instead, she stepped back, as if afraid. Sarah's heart cracked wide open. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. She didn't want to scare her. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, kneeling slowly, keeping her voice as soft as the lullabies she used to sing. "You're safe now, baby. I promise." The girl, Emily, shook her head violently. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. She was terrified. Sarah's mind raced. How long had she been here? Who had kept her? Was it someone from town? Someone she knew? The thought sent chills racing up her spine. Then, suddenly, Emily moved. She took a slow, shaky step forward. Sarah held her breath. Emily's wide, dark eyes darted toward the barn entrance, as though expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Then she reached out, her tiny fingers grazing Sarah's trembling hand before her lips parted, and in the faintest whisper, she spoke. "He's coming." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Who, sweetheart?" she asked, forcing herself to remain calm, though her pulse roared in her ears. "Who's coming?" Emily's tiny frame began to shake, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then she turned and did something that made Sarah's blood run cold. She pointed behind her. Sarah followed her gaze, her breath hitching. At first, she saw nothing, just the back of the barn, the wooden beams, the stacked hay bales. But then, a noise. A footstep. Sarah's pulse exploded. There, in the darkness of the farthest stall, a shadow moved. A figure, tall, broad, and silent, emerged from the shadows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Lightning flashed, and for one horrifying second, she saw the man's face. Clay Jensen, Sarah's childhood neighbor. The man who had lived less than 2 miles from her farm for decades. The man who had helped search for Emily when she went missing. The man who had been at every community meeting, every vigil, every prayer circle. And now, here he stood, in her barn. A slow, eerie smile spread across his face. "Well," he said, his deep voice carrying over the storm. "Isn't this unexpected? A decade of lies." Sarah couldn't move. Her legs refused to obey. Her body remained rooted in place, her heart slamming against her ribs. Clay took a slow step forward, his boots crunching in the straw. Sarah instinctively grabbed Emily's wrist and yanked her closer, shielding her behind her own body. "Stay away," she breathed, voice barely above a whisper. Clay tilted his head, as if amused. Now, Sarah. There's no need to overreact." Sarah's entire body ignited with rage. No need to overreact. No need? He had her daughter, her baby, for 10 years. "You're a monster," she spat, her voice shaking. "You." Clay held up a hand. "Now, before you start screaming for help, let's have a chat, shall we?" Sarah's nails dug into her palms. She needed to get Emily out of there. She needed to run. She quickly scanned the barn, her mind whirling. There were only two exits, the main barn doors and the side door near the pig pens. Both were too far. She wouldn't make it with Emily in tow. Clay Jensen was a big man, well over 6 feet, strong from decades of farm work. Sarah knew she couldn't overpower him, but she also knew him. She had grown up with him. Their families had been neighbors since before she was born, and she knew exactly what kind of man he was. A liar, a manipulator, a man who always got what he wanted. So she did the only thing she could. She played along. For now. Sarah swallowed the bile rising in her throat and forced her expression to soften. "Clay," she said carefully, keeping her voice even, her hands trembling behind her back. "Please, just tell me why." The question seemed to amuse him. "Why?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Because I wanted to teach you a lesson, Sarah." A shiver ran through her. A lesson. Clay took another step closer, his sharp gaze locked onto her like a predator watching its prey. "You remember, don't you?" His voice dropped into a near growl. "You and your husband, buying up my grandfather's land when he was too sick to fight for it, leaving my family with nothing." Sarah's heart clenched. That wasn't true. Her family had bought their land fair and square. Clay's grandfather had been old, yes, but he had willingly sold the property. No one had forced him. But Clay had always blamed them. Even as a child, he had harbored resentment, anger, and now she understood why. This was revenge. "You took something from me," Clay said, his voice eerily calm. "So I took something from you." Sarah's stomach turned. A child. He had stolen a child. Her grip on Emily tightened. The little girl was shaking against her, her breath ragged, her frail body still too afraid to speak. "You're sick," Sarah whispered, rage searing through her like wildfire. Clay grinned. "Maybe." Sarah's pulse pounded. She had to act now. She had one chance. Her mind raced. There was a rusty pitchfork a few feet away, leaning against the barn wall. If she could just get to it. Another crash of thunder shook the barn, and Sarah moved. Fast. She lunged, grabbing the pitchfork before Clay could react. She spun, raising the weapon, pointing it directly at his chest. "Don't move." Her voice was steady now, cold. Clay's eyes darkened. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, a single bone-chilling smirk, and Clay said, "You think that's going to stop me?" The barn door slammed open. A second figure appeared in the doorway, and Sarah's world shattered all over again, because standing in the pouring rain, his face hidden in the shadows, was her husband, Daniel, and he was holding a shotgun. "Step away from my wife," Daniel growled. And this time, Clay's smirk vanished. The reckoning in the barn. The barn hung thick with tension, the only sounds the heavy breathing of its occupants and the wind howling outside. The single lantern swung from its post, casting long, twisting shadows against the wooden beams. Sarah's hands gripped the pitchfork so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Emily clung to the fabric of her mother's shirt, her tiny body trembling. Across from them, Clay Jensen stood perfectly still, and in the doorway, framed by the storm, Daniel Whitmore held a shotgun, aimed directly at Clay's chest. "Step away from my wife." Daniel's voice was sharp, a blade in the darkness. Clay's smirk faltered. He took a slow step back, hands half raised as if considering his options. The lightning outside flashed, momentarily illuminating his face. Cold, calculating, unafraid. Sarah didn't trust that. Her heart thundered. "Dan, he has Emily," she gasped, emotion strangling her words. Daniel's eyes flickered from Clay to the frail child gripping Sarah's waist, and something inside him broke. His grip tightened on the shotgun. "Where did you keep her?" His voice was low, dark, a storm of its own. Where has she been for 10 years? Clay's lips curled, his head tilting slightly as he took another step back. His boots crunched against the straw-laden floor. You think I'm just gonna tell you? Clay scoffed. Think I'm just gonna give you answers? Daniel took a step forward, the shotgun cocked. Sarah flinched at the sound. She had never seen her husband like this. Fury personified. He was always calm, always rational. But now, there was nothing calm about him. This is how this is gonna go, Daniel said, his voice terrifyingly steady. You're going to tell us everything. Or I swear to God. His fingers twitched on the trigger. You won't leave this barn. Clay exhaled through his nose, expression unreadable. Then he glanced at Sarah. This your plan? His voice had an almost amused edge. You gotta let your husband do your dirty work. Sarah saw through it. He was stalling. He was waiting. For what she didn't know. But she didn't intend to find out. She lunged. Clay reacted instantly, his arm shooting out, knocking the pitchfork from her grip with brutal force. Sarah gasped, staggering back. Emily shrieked, stumbling away, hands flying to her ears. Daniel fired. The gunshot shattered the silence. The force of the blast shook the barn walls, causing the animals in the pens to squeal and thrash in panic. But Clay was already moving. He dove sideways, fast, ducking behind the wooden stalls. The shot missed by inches, tearing into the wood, splintering it into jagged shards. Sarah grabbed Emily, yanking her toward the entrance. Run, she screamed. Emily hesitated for only a second before sprinting for the door, her bare feet barely making a sound against the packed dirt floor. Sarah turned just in time to see Clay lunge at Daniel. They collided. The shotgun flew from Daniel's grip, clattering to the ground. Sarah moved on instinct, scrambling toward it. But before she could reach it, Clay whipped around, grabbing the pitchfork she had dropped. Sarah barely had time to react. Clay swung it like a club, the metal prongs slamming into Daniel's side. Daniel grunted, stumbling back, pain flashing across his face. No, Sarah screamed. Clay turned on her next, eyes wild, sweat glistening on his forehead. He lifted the pitchfork again. A deafening bang exploded through the barn. Clay jerked, his body going rigid. A dark crimson stain spread across his side. Sarah's breath caught. Clay stumbled backward, dropping the pitchfork. His knees buckled. He collapsed against the wooden stall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His hand pressed against the bullet wound in his abdomen, blood seeping through his fingers. Sarah's eyes snapped to the entrance. Emily stood there, holding the shotgun. The barrel was still smoking. Her tiny hands trembled, her wide, terrified eyes locked onto the man who had stolen 10 years of her life. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Clay laughed, a wet, broken sound. Well, ain't this something, he coughed, blood trickling from his lips. His fingers flexed weakly in the dirt. His smirk, even in the face of death, remained. Guess you really are your father's daughter. Daniel stepped forward, kicking the pitchfork away from Clay's reach. His hand shook as he took the shotgun from Emily, prying it gently from her grasp. You don't ever have to do that again, baby, Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Emily didn't answer. She just stared at Clay. Her expression was unreadable. Sarah finally found her voice. Where did you keep her? She demanded. Her entire body shook, years of grief and rage burning through her. Where, Clay? Clay's breathing hitched. His eyelids fluttered. He was dying, and Sarah didn't care. Tell me, she screamed. Clay lifted his head slightly, his bloody lips twitching into something almost satisfied. Then he whispered, You really think she was the only one? Sarah's stomach dropped. Her breath caught in her throat. The only one. Clay gave a weak chuckle, shaking his head. Search the farm, he rasped. See what you find. Then his head lolled to the side, and he stopped moving. Sarah stared. Clay Jensen was dead, but his words hung in the air like a curse. A second search. The police arrived within minutes. The storm had finally passed, but the true nightmare was just beginning. Sarah and Daniel sat huddled in the farmhouse as officers swarmed the property, combing through every inch of Clay's land. And then an officer called out, "We found something." Sarah's heart stopped. She ran. Through the wet, muddy fields, through the chaos of flashing police lights and barking dogs, through the sea of uniformed officers who tried to stop her. She reached the north side of the property, the old storage barn, and when she stepped inside, she saw them. 7 cages. 7. Each one locked. Each one occupied by children. Sarah's knees buckled. Sobs racked her body as the officers worked to pry open the cages. One by one, the children were carried out. One by one, they blinked into the light of freedom. And every single one of them bore the same haunted, hollow expression, the same emptiness she had seen in her own daughter. Sarah turned away. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Clay had kept others. He had stolen more than just Emily. And God only knew how many were already gone. Justice and aftermath. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Clay's farm was shut down, declared a crime scene. The case made national news. Reporters swarmed the area, desperate for details. The children were identified. Families were reunited. Some had been missing for years. Others had been taken recently. And through it all, Sarah never let Emily out of her sight. Not once. Emily was home, but she was not okay. She barely spoke. She barely ate. She sat by the window, watching, waiting, as if expecting him to return. Sarah knew it would take years to heal, maybe a lifetime. But as she held her daughter that night, whispering words of love and safety, she swore one thing: Emily would never feel alone again. And Clay Jensen's legacy of horror, it ended here. The road to healing and the shadows of the past. The news spread like wildfire. The infamous case of Clay Jensen and the abducted children shook the entire country. Reporters lined the dusty roads leading to the farm, their cameras flashing against the dull gray morning light. The barn where Sarah Whitmore had found Emily became the epicenter of horror and speculation, a place where unspeakable crimes had been committed in secret for years. Sarah and Daniel refused interviews. They refused to let anyone near Emily. The world wanted to know how she had survived for 10 years in captivity. How a girl, stolen at 2 years old, had lived within the confines of Clay's farm, unseen, unnoticed. But Sarah knew Emily wasn't ready to talk. She wasn't even ready to live. Emily's silence. The Whitmore farmhouse, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a stranger's home. Sarah had kept everything exactly the same. Emily's old toys still lined the shelves in her bedroom, her childhood drawings taped to the walls. But Emily, she didn't recognize any of it. She barely spoke. She didn't play with the stuffed animals Sarah had once picked out for her. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just watched. Every night, she sat by the window, her frail body curled into a tight ball, staring into the darkness beyond the cornfields. As if waiting. Sarah couldn't bear it. She tried everything. Therapy, comfort, warm meals, soft lullabies. But nothing reached her. Daniel tried too. He would sit beside Emily on the porch, staring at the fields with her, hoping she would talk, hoping she would say something about what she had been through. But she wouldn't. Or maybe she couldn't. Until one night, nearly 3 weeks after bringing Emily home, she finally spoke. A single whisper, soft, faint, almost like a ghost's breath. "He's still here." Sarah's blood froze. She turned to Emily, heart hammering in her chest. "What, sweetheart?" Emily's small, bony fingers gripped Sarah's wrist. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He's still here, Mommy. He never left." The unfinished nightmare. Sarah told herself it was trauma. That Emily was reliving the nightmare. That her mind hadn't adjusted to the fact that Clay was dead. That no one could hurt her anymore. But deep down, something inside Sarah twisted with unease. She felt it too. A presence, a shadow that lingered. Some nights, she swore she heard footsteps outside the house. Soft, careful, watching. The cops had cleared the farm. They had investigated every inch of Clay's land and found no one else. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was right, that he was still here. The letters. Then the letters started coming. They appeared in the mailbox, in plain white envelopes with no return address. The first one was simple. You shouldn't have taken what wasn't yours. Sarah's hands shook as she read it. She showed it to Daniel, who dismissed it as some sick prank. The whole damn country knows what happened, he muttered, crumpling the letter. Some lunatic's messing with us. But Sarah's gut told her differently. Clay was dead. But someone else, was still out there. And they weren't done yet. The hidden door. It was Emily who found it. Late one evening, as the sun dipped below the fields, she walked into the barn alone. Sarah noticed too late. She turned, catching sight of Emily's small figure disappearing into the weathered wooden structure. Emily, she called, rushing after her. She found her standing at the back of the barn, staring at the floor. Sarah followed her gaze, and her stomach twisted. The floorboards were loose, old, worn from use. Sarah's mouth went dry. She knelt, pressing a shaking hand against the boards. They shifted beneath her touch. A trapdoor. Sarah's pulse pounded. Slowly, she pulled. The boards creaked, revealing a dark hole beneath the barn floor. A tunnel. It stretched deep into the earth. A hidden passage. A secret place. Sarah's breath came in shaky gasps. Emily didn't look surprised. She simply whispered, "That's where he kept the others." Buried secrets. Sarah wanted to vomit. A tunnel. Under their farm. How had the police missed it? How had they never noticed? She grabbed Emily, pulling her away from the hole. "We're leaving," she said, her voice thick with panic. But Emily didn't move. Her tiny hands clenched into fists. "He's still down there," she whispered. Sarah swallowed hard. And for the first time, she asked the question she had been too afraid to ask. "Emily, how did Clay die?" Emily's eyes darkened. She looked toward the tunnel, then back at her mother, and she whispered, "Clay didn't die alone. The second man." Sarah's world tilted. Her breath stilled in her lungs. "Emily, what are you saying?" she choked. Emily's lips trembled. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "There was another man," she finally whispered. "Clay wasn't the only one." Sarah's stomach turned to ice. Emily clutched Sarah's arm. "He was always watching," she whispered. "He was always there. He told us that if we ever tried to leave, he'd come for us." Sarah's mind spun. Another man. A partner. Someone who had helped Clay steal those children. Someone who had never been caught. Suddenly, the footsteps outside at night didn't seem like paranoia. The letters weren't a prank. And the feeling that someone was watching them. It was real. Sarah grabbed Emily's hand and ran from the barn. She burst through the farmhouse door, her voice raw with panic. "Daniel!" she screamed. He rushed from the kitchen, eyes wide. Sarah turned, grabbing the shotgun off the wall, her breath ragged. Daniel's face darkened. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah gritted her teeth. Her hands trembled on the gun. She looked out the window toward the shadowed fields. And for the first time in 10 years, she knew the truth. Clay Jensen was dead. But the real nightmare wasn't over. The man in the shadows. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the farmhouse windows like unseen fingers clawing at the glass. Sarah Whitmore stood in the dimly lit living room, shotgun in hand, her body rigid with terror. Across from her, Daniel's face was tight with fury, his knuckles white, as he gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. Emily stood between them, her tiny frame trembling. But her eyes, those haunted, knowing eyes, never left the window, never left the darkness beyond the fields. Sarah had spent 10 years believing Clay Jensen was the monster. But now she knew the truth. He wasn't alone. He never had been. And now, whoever had helped him was coming for them. The warning in the dark. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second stretching into eternity. Daniel finally spoke, his voice rough. "We need to call the police." Sarah's breath came in ragged bursts. She shook her head, her grip tightening on the shotgun. "And tell them what? That our traumatized daughter says there was another man. That she found a hidden tunnel under the barn." She exhaled sharply. "They'll think we're losing our minds." Daniel clenched his jaw. "They have to investigate." Sarah looked toward Emily. The girl hadn't moved. Her small hands were clenched into fists, her gaze still locked on the fields beyond the house. Sarah's stomach twisted. She knows something. She walked toward Emily, kneeling in front of her, gently touching her shoulder. "Baby," she whispered, "you have to tell us the truth now." Emily's breath hitched. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, in the faintest voice, she said, "He's already here." Sarah's blood ran cold. And then, a sound, a soft creak on the porch, a shadow shifting beyond the window. Sarah's heart pounded like a drum. Daniel grabbed the shotgun from her hands, stepping toward the front door. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice tense. "Take Emily. Get upstairs." Sarah didn't argue. She scooped Emily into her arms and bolted up the stairs, her mind screaming at her to move faster. She slammed the bedroom door shut behind her, locking it. Emily buried her face into Sarah's shoulder, her breath coming in panicked gasps. "Shh, baby, it's okay," Sarah whispered, rocking her gently. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Not when she heard the slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. Not when she heard Daniel cock the shotgun downstairs. Not when a soft, menacing voice floated through the walls of the house. "Sarah, I know you're awake." Sarah stopped breathing. Her arms tightened around Emily. The voice was calm, familiar. And worse, it was close. Too close. The stranger who wasn't a stranger. Downstairs, Daniel moved closer to the door. His pulse thundered in his ears. The voice outside was too casual, too controlled. Like this was just another visit. Like he wasn't standing outside a house he had no business being near in the middle of the night. Daniel's fingers flexed around the shotgun. "Who the hell are you?" he growled. A pause. Then, "I'm disappointed, Dan," the voice said, almost playfully. "You really don't recognize me." Daniel's stomach tightened, because the truth was, he did. The voice sent a sick, gut-wrenching familiarity through him, like a ghost of the past whispering in his ear. Slowly, realization crept in. And when the voice spoke again, Daniel felt his grip on the gun weaken. "It's me, old friend," the man said. "Why don't you open the door, so we can talk?" Daniel knew that voice. He had trusted that voice, and now it belonged to a monster. A secret buried in the past. Sarah pressed her ear to the wooden door, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Downstairs, Daniel's voice was tight with rage. "Warren." Sarah's eyes went wide. Warren. Warren Douglas. The man who had lived in town his whole life. A farmer, just like them. A friend of Daniel's since childhood. A man they had once had dinner with. A man who had searched the fields for Emily 10 years ago, standing beside them as they sobbed. A man who had looked them in the eyes. And lied. Sarah's stomach lurched. The second man. It had been him all along. She felt Emily tense in her arms. "He was there," Emily whispered, her voice hollow. "All the time. He never let me see his face. But I knew." Sarah's hands shook. Downstairs, Warren chuckled. "I told Clay he was getting sloppy," he sighed. "Guess I was right." Daniel's grip tightened on the shotgun. "You were his partner. he breathed. Warren laughed. That's an ugly word for it, Dan. We were business partners. Daniel's skin crawled. Why? His voice cracked with fury. Why the hell would you do this? Another chuckle. Because people will always pay for what they want. Daniel's stomach turned. His fingers flexed on the trigger. You took my daughter, Daniel hissed. And so many others, Warren agreed casually. But she was the only one who ever came back, wasn't she? Bang! Daniel fired. The blast ripped through the night, shattering the silence. But the porch was empty. Warren was gone. Sarah's pulse exploded. Daniel whirled toward the window, just in time to see a dark figure disappearing into the fields. The same fields where Emily had disappeared 10 years ago. Sarah clutched Emily tighter, and she whispered the only truth she knew. This isn't over. The final hunt. The moon was high over the Iowa farmland, casting silver light on the rolling fields. The wind whispered through the rows of corn, bending the stalks in eerie waves. The Whitmore house stood in silence, but inside, there was nothing but chaos. Daniel Whitmore's heart thundered like a war drum. The shotgun was still smoking in his hands. Warren Douglas had disappeared into the fields. And now, Daniel was going after him. Sarah stood in the doorway, her grip tight on Emily. Dan, no, we have to wait for the police. But Daniel wasn't waiting. Not this time. Not after 10 years of hell. His daughter had suffered in darkness and chains, while that man, a friend, a neighbor, sat at their table, lied to their faces. Clay Jensen was dead. But the real monster was still breathing. Daniel wouldn't let him slip away. Not tonight. Without a word, he cocked the shotgun and disappeared into the fields. Into the corn. The moment Daniel stepped into the rows of towering corn, the world changed. The air was thick, damp. The stalks swayed, whispering secrets he couldn't understand. Warren was out here, hiding, watching. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears as he moved slowly, deliberately. His boots crunched against the dirt path. His finger hovered over the trigger. Somewhere, maybe 10, maybe 20 yards ahead, a rustle broke the silence. Daniel froze. His breath held. Then, a voice. Soft, amused. You sure you want to do this, Dan? Daniel turned toward the sound, his jaw clenched. You're not getting away, Warren. A low chuckle. You always were a stubborn bastard. Daniel's eyes scanned the darkness, searching for movement. You worked with Clay, he said, his voice rough. You took my daughter. You took other kids. For what? Money. A beat of silence. Then laughter. Deep, hollow. Money, Warren said. Power. Control. A little bit of everything, I suppose. Daniel's stomach churned. You're sick. You're naive. Warren shot back. You think monsters like me exist in the shadows. No, Dan. We live next door. We shake your hand at church. We sell you eggs at the farmer's market. Daniel's grip tightened on the shotgun. The corn shifted to his left. He turned, raising the barrel. Too late. A heavy force slammed into his side, knocking him off balance. The shotgun flew from his grip. Daniel hit the ground hard, the breath ripping from his lungs. His head smacked against the dirt, and for a moment, his vision swam. Then, Warren was on top of him. A glint of steel flashed in the moonlight. A knife. Daniel barely had time to roll before the blade slashed down, missing his throat by inches. He grabbed Warren's wrist, muscles burning as he struggled against the older man's strength. Warren grinned. Come on, Dan. You didn't think you'd make it out of this alive, did you? Daniel's teeth clenched. Neither are you. With every ounce of strength, he twisted Warren's wrist, forcing the knife downward. The blade sank deep into Warren's shoulder. Warren let out a sharp, ragged gasp. Daniel didn't stop, didn't give him a chance to recover. He punched Warren square in the jaw, sending the man sprawling into the dirt. Gasping, Daniel scrambled to his feet. His eyes darted to the shotgun. 3 feet away. He lunged. A hand grabbed his ankle, yanked him backward. Daniel hit the ground again, pain exploding in his ribs. Warren, still bleeding, was crawling toward him, his teeth bared in a snarl. Daniel's hand closed around a rock. Without thinking, he swung it. The rock crashed into Warren's temple. The older man's body jerked. Then, stillness. A single ragged breath. Then, nothing. Daniel staggered back, chest heaving. He took a shaking step forward, kneeling over Warren's body. The man's eyes were half open, lifeless. It was over. It was finally over. Daniel sat there for a long moment, the night air thick with the scent of dirt, blood, and justice. And then, in the distance, sirens. The aftermath. By the time the police arrived, Daniel was standing at the edge of the field, covered in dirt and sweat, staring at Warren's lifeless body. Sarah and Emily ran toward him, relief etched in their faces. Emily grabbed his hand, gripping it so tightly his fingers ached. "You came back," she whispered. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "I always will." The officers took their statements. Warren Douglas was pronounced dead on the scene. And with him, the last monster in the dark was finally gone. The police combed through his house, his barns, his land. And what they found made national headlines. Records, photos, videos, evidence of years of abductions and sales. Clay Jensen had been a kidnapper. Warren Douglas had been the one selling them. For powerful people. For money. For control. But now, their operation was dead. And Emily Whitmore was home. The healing. The days passed slowly. Emily still struggled. She still flinched at loud noises. She still refused to sleep without a light on. But she was safe. She was healing. And Sarah and Daniel. They never let her out of their sight again. One night, as Sarah tucked Emily into bed, she hesitated at the door. Her daughter's voice, soft, hesitant, made her pause. "Mommy." Sarah turned. "Yes, baby." Emily's tiny fingers clutched the blanket. "He didn't take me because of the land," she whispered. Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily swallowed. "He took me because I was special," she murmured. Sarah's heart pounded. "Special? How?" Emily hesitated. Then, softly, "Because I can see things." Sarah's breath hitched. Emily's eyes darkened. "That's why they wanted me." Sarah stood frozen. Then, in the silence, Emily's gaze drifted past her mother, to the window, to the fields beyond, and she whispered, "He's still watching." Sarah's blood ran cold. Her breath stopped. Her fingers trembled as she slowly, hesitantly, turned toward the window. And in the distance, in the moonlit cornfield, a shadow stood among the stalks, watching. The shadow in the fields. Sarah Whitmore's breath stilled. Outside the window, in the moonlit cornfield, a shadow stood among the stalks, watching. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Emily had seen it first. And now, so did she. A tall figure, unmoving. A presence that shouldn't be there. But Sarah knew. She felt it in her bones. This wasn't Warren Douglas. This wasn't Clay Jensen. This was someone else. Someone who had been part of this from the start. Her hands trembled at her sides. She turned to Emily. The little girl's wide, dark eyes stared into the night. "He's waiting," she whispered. Sarah swallowed hard. For what? Emily's tiny fingers curled into the blanket. For the others. The ghosts of the taken. A chill seeped into Sarah's bones. She turned back to the window, heart hammering. The shadow in the cornfield wasn't alone anymore. More figures were emerging. Slowly. One by one. Their bodies thin and frail. Their faces hidden in darkness. At first, she thought, more men, more monsters. But then realization hit her like ice water. They weren't alive. They weren't watching her. They were watching Emily. Sarah's fingers tightened around the window frame. "Emily," she whispered. "Who are they?" Emily turned toward her mother, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "They're the ones who never came home." The unseen truth. Sarah felt her stomach turn. She knew what Emily meant. Not all the missing children had been saved. Not all of them had made it out of those cages. Some had been lost, taken beyond rescue. And now, they had come back. For her daughter. For Emily. Sarah couldn't breathe. She turned back to the cornfield. The figures were closer now. The wind picked up, whipping the stalks into a frantic rustle. Emily climbed out of bed, her tiny feet hitting the wooden floor with a soft thud. She walked to Sarah's side, her hand reaching up, pressing against the glass. "I can hear them," she whispered. Sarah turned to her. "What are they saying?" Emily's lips trembled. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They want me to come with them." Sarah's heart stopped. The choice. Panic slammed into her chest like a hammer. "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "No one is taking you anywhere. You're staying here. With us." Emily's small fingers curled against the glass. "But they're alone," she murmured. "And they're scared." Sarah swallowed back a sob. She knelt, grabbing Emily's face gently, forcing her daughter to look at her. "You're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "You hear me? You are not going with them." Emily blinked. Then, for the first time in weeks, a single tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't want to," she whispered, "but they say I'm the only one who can help them." Sarah's chest ached. She believed her daughter. She believed every word. Emily had been special since birth. She had always seen things no one else could see. Maybe that's why they had taken her. Not just for revenge. Not just for money. But because Emily was different. And now, the ones who had been lost forever, the ones buried in the darkness of Clay and Warren's crimes. They have found her. The final goodbye. Emily pressed her forehead to the glass. For a long moment, she stared at the figures in the field. Then, she whispered something Sarah couldn't hear. And the figures began to fade. One by one, until the night was empty again. Sarah watched, breathless. She turned to Emily. Her daughter's eyes were still wet, but she smiled, a small, tired smile. "They're gone now," she whispered. Sarah pulled her into her arms, clutching her tight. She didn't know what had just happened. She didn't know if it was real or something beyond her understanding. All she knew was Emily was still here. And she was never letting her go again. 1 month later. The Whitmores never spoke of that night. Not to the police. Not to anyone. The case of Clay Jensen and Warren Douglas had been closed. The farm was destroyed, burned to the ground in a controlled demolition. Daniel made sure of it. Emily never looked back. She never saw the figures again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind moved through the cornfields just right, Sarah swore she could hear whispers. Soft, grateful whispers, like children's voices carried on the breeze. And deep in her heart, she knew. Emily had saved them, even the ones who were never found. And finally, they could rest.